Okay, let's get going. Good morning. We hope to wake you up for real with a session on hybrid films. I saw this Docs magazine, the new issue that came out. It has an archetype of different types of documentary filmmakers, and there's one called about hybrid. The new trend is hybrid docs. Any definition will be obsolete by the time you read this article. So it's whoa, that was very early. We can all leave now. It's a fad. It's obsolete. We cannot say anything meaningful about it. No, of course, the point of this session is the exact opposite. That hybrid films are out there. They're there for good reasons, and maybe it would be a kind of filmmaking that you could be interested in, or we could be interested in hearing your experiences with. We'll talk a bit about what hybrid films are. We'll talk about how they're scripted, how they're directed, and how they're marketed, and what role they could play in future television and cinema markets. The panel will be involved later, but the first half hour will be kind of a mini lecture with a typology of hybrid films, just to give you a little overview. My voice seems very kind of whoa, but it doesn't seem that way to you. It's just okay. Okay, thank you. That's what I want to hear. Okay, my name is Jakob Høel. I'm artistic director of something called New Danish Screen, where we do talent development and we support experimentation, both development and production. And we don't, as such, distinguish between documentary and fiction. And what has happened in the course of supporting film projects is that we, without really thinking about it, have ended up supporting a hell of a lot of hybrid films. So it's that experience from doing it and not even using the word hybrid or thinking of it as hybrid, but then looking back upon some of the things we've supported that I've come to take interest in talking about hybrid films. I'm an anthropologist by training, and the most powerful use of the word hybrid, I think, comes from races. The mixing of races ended in hybrids, and for a long time, hybrids were considered something that went against God's will, against the order of nature, that you shouldn't mix white and black, or Indian and black, and so on. And in the racial sense, the word hybrid carries not a very strong moral undertones. And I think looking at filmmaking, we have a bit of the same. Of course, race is a different issue, but I think we have a tendency to think of it in moral terms. And initially, hybrid was negatively seen, going against the order of what is a documentary, what is a fiction film. More recently, I think we've come to the other end, namely the jubilation, the feeling that, wow, everything is hybrid. And somehow, at least I hope that we today can avoid both those moral stances, because to me, it's not. I mean, a lot of documentary filmmakers have been very eager to kind of set up rules, boundaries. What are we allowed to do? How much fiction can you put into documentary and still call it documentary? Especially broadcasters have had a long-standing interest in rule setting. And at least this panel and our outset to talk about hybrids is a different one. It's about what is the story you want to tell and what means you have of telling it. As simple as that. Of course, there are ethical issues, and those can be addressed as well, but the basic idea that there should be something either perverse or something exuberantly great about mixing documentary and fiction. I don't subscribe to either of those. And I mean, there's been the similar reluctance from the side of fiction to be in a hybrid space, because documentary seen from a fiction perspective is seen as kind of low grade, less artistic quality, and so on. So beyond all these prejudices, we'll just jump straight into to a typology of 4 different types of hybrids. And my focus here is on what do hybrids do to an audience? What experience is it that an audience gets out of a particular film? And the first type that you all know very well is the mockumentary. And of course, Spinal Tap, I'm sure you're all familiar with that. And it's perhaps the historically longest running hybrid genre. I'm Still Here is a recent example. But, and there is there's an ideal in the mockumentary that what the audience does is that it goes to watch a documentary, this is real, and then at some point, no, it wasn't real. I mean, it's the hoax, the mockery type of experience. That works once or twice, it doesn't work forever. I'm Still Here is a good example of that already the buzz around the film was, I mean, I don't think anybody went to the cinema seeing it thinking this is a clear-cut documentary. So the people were already interested in it as a hybrid. It didn't work as a hoax. I've supported one film, I won't show a clip because it's quite a complicated film, called Empire North. And it has an interesting caption at the beginning saying, any relation to real events is coincidental. But then when you see it, you realize there is something very real about that. So it kind of it makes you curious. You want to know what is documentary, because we're so used to being cheated or tricked that if you take it from the different side, say that this is fiction, but as a viewer you feel, no, this is not fiction. I can see this is really real and something is happening right in front of my eyes. That is maybe a way of kind of getting the audience attention in that this is real, not kind of way. I think the mockumentary is not a thing of the past, but I don't think that's where the excitement is. I don't think that audiences will be that keen on the hoax factor anymore. I think we've seen maybe the works in that arena that we needed. Then we go to a second type, and I know that parts are made up, but they have an effect on something I see as real. And I think that's, for audiences, a much more pleasurable place to be. They're not kind of sitting at the edge of their seat. Am I being cheated? Am I not? They wander into something where they're allowed to explore the film as fiction, but they also have a sense that this has real life implications. So in a sense, it takes the good parts of fiction and the good parts of documentary experience into one. Of course, there are ethical boundaries as to what happens in that space. But I think Borat was I'm a huge fan of that film. I think it did that extremely well. I don't care which scenes were made up and which weren't. I know that some were, I know that some weren't. But I get to watch it as a documentary and a fiction at the same time. I'll show a clip from another film in that sphere, which is The Ambassador, the film out here on the right. And just mention that the other films are also films that we've supported. what they do have in common, all these films, is that the director is also the main character. So the insertion of something fictitious into a real world happens very much through elaborate characters. And I think later when we talk to the panel, we'll see some interesting developments, because I think there's been quite a lot of these films now. I think we'll move into a different insertion of fiction into real life than these very visible characters. But we'll see a clip from The Ambassador. Does any of you know the film? Yeah, okay. It's a Danish journalist and filmmaker, and we'll just see the first 3 minutes. I think they'll give you a good sense of what's going on.
Thank you very much, sir. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you warm, wonderful people. Yes. My name is Mr. Poulsen. I am a businessman. I'm a diplomat. I make matches. Soon I am going to the Central African Republic to represent the interests of Liberia there. I hope you will pray to God to watch over me there, because it is a dangerous place, but I will do my best to accomplish my mission. So praise be the Lord, and it's wonderful to be with you today, and hope to see you again soon.
Hey, Matt. Hey, Colin, nice to see you. Likewise. Likewise. Good. That's almost done. Wow. This here, just so I explain what this is, it's like a castle.
Leave our jackets because it's going to be quite hot. And I'd appreciate it if you left your mobile phone.
Yes.
I'm going to leave mine.
Yes.
And your bag.
Okay.
Just leave everything.
Yes, okay.
Leave everything. I've asked you to leave your mobile phone and your bag and everything.
Yeah.
I don't want this conversation to be recorded.
No.
Okay. This conversation that we're about to have never happened.
Okay.
All right?
Yes.
I have a good feeling that you're interested in the Central African Republic is so deep.
Yeah?
And I think that your goal is you want to have unfettered access, preferably with diplomatic credentials, in and out of a diamond-producing zone.
That is well.
Okay.
From this point, there is no going back. Here ends my life as a Danish journalist. What awaits me is a life where I can operate freely, beyond all moral boundaries known to man, while still being a respectable member of society. A life where I can indulge myself in secret state affairs, enjoy red carpet treatment, and travel the world with a suitcase full of diamonds. What I am talking about is, of course, a life as an African diplomat.
I don't want to set the world on fire. I just want to start a flame.
I think the setup is quite clear. He goes with the intent of buying diamonds, showing how business, politics, and diplomacy are completely intertwined in a country like the Central African Republic. In that also exposes a trade in diplomatic titles. He is actually still the ambassador of Liberia to Central African Republic. The film was the opening film at IDFA last year, and it's been in Sundance, and it's actually in a competing festival. It's in Edinburgh next week. I think you know the sense, and of course I think it's interesting with a film like this and Borat to see what means do you use, how much do you expose, and what does it take to do that. In Mass's case, it was actually thought out to be a fiction film. It was a written script, but once he got to Africa, he couldn't control anything, so he still had his fictitious character, but all the events that actually happened there were not in the script. Everything happened in a different way than he had expected. But I think it's if you do want to work in this, I think you need some level of script writing, no matter what, because how do you put on a role like that? How does Sacha Baron Cohen put on a role? Well, you have to, like in any good fiction, create a character with intentions, with depth, with some sense of urgency that you can work with. On the other hand, trying to write real storylines for this type of film is extremely difficult. The cases I've worked with have never worked. So the real strength is a character in a fictitious character in a real setting, but from what the events, what the turning points, what could be interesting is very difficult to predict. At least in the ambassador's case, it was a real business dealing with a diamond mine owner that became the main story of the film, and nobody could have predicted that beforehand. At the same time, it works as a documentary. There was the guy who ends up selling the passport is a Dutch guy who went on Dutch television, complained. The president of Liberia has complained about the film. The fact that he uses bribes in the film, a lot of people complained in Denmark. I was about to get sacked. But at exactly the right point, Ellen Johnson got the Nobel Prize, so all the journalists turned their attention to that instead of my little wrongdoing. So it does have real life implications, although it comes to some extent out of fiction. Okay, the next type I have called... Can you push? Yeah, next slide, please. This could be real, docu-fiction. You probably know Uncle Bunmi, who remembers previous lives. I can't remember the whole title. A Thai film that won the main prize in Cannes 2 years ago. Le Quattro Volte, an Italian film, and the rest are films that I've supported. Basically, the kind of audience experience these films deliver is audience will go and see them as fiction, but with some expectation that I will get added value in terms of added realism of one sort or another. This is more than a script being realized. It has some qualities that go beyond mere fiction. And it's difficult to, or the best way is to exemplify it. And I'll do that with a clip from this film down at the bottom called R. It's made by a Danish documentary director and a fiction writer. So that in itself gives a sense of the collaboration involved. The documentary filmmaker didn't want to write a script for this. He was interested in prison systems, how do they work, whereas the scriptwriter he didn't have a story, but his ambition was that the main character should die at the end of the second act. That's a very peculiar ambition to have before you've even written the story. But actually those two ambitions could work out together because they're both about describing a system and not relying heavily on the normal types of story that we tell in fiction. Especially prison dramas are always about guilt. They're always, did he do it, did he not? And the whole point of this film was to avoid that question. Audience shouldn't end up with a moral sense of this character and his doing. It's a film that wants to describe a prison system, modes of survival. in the worst prison in Denmark in this case. The way they worked towards the film was documentary. They took former inmates to the prison. They acted out scenes with them. They built up the storyline in collaboration with the inmates. The two directors played a lot of roles in the casting themselves, so they also kind of took in the prison system, and it so happened that one of the directors really loved being the warden and the other really liked being a criminal, so they could play out their own little fantasies. I'll show you a scene that's from, it's 2/3 into the film. Our main character, the blonde guy, has at long last made his way in the prison. He's found a new way to get drugs into the prison, so he's being rewarded by the top dogs in his unit.
Okay, lige ved at lave de indledende manøvrer her. Ja. Kridt banen op.
Du er nødt til at hjælpe ham, for fanden. Ja. Skal de varme op først, eller hvad sker der?
Ja, jeg tror, de er ved at opvarme. Jeg tror godt, vi kan sætte bolden i spil.
Hvad satan, er det fodbold? Hvem spiller?
Queen's Park Rangers FCK. Queen's Park i gult her. Lige pas på, at de små frækker, der ikke skal ud. Ja, de har det med at være på springtur. Ja, det synes jeg, der har været noget med. Så var det ikke længe, så tror jeg, de går til bolden her. Ja, se, hvordan der spiller i gang. Ja, og der er selvmål! Yes, første scoring her. Fantastisk flot. Det er en ildsjæl, den gule her. Queen's Park. 1-1. Han spiller alene. Sådan i gang igen. Kom så, Queen's Park.
Kom så. Spændende.
Målmanden står bare og glor. Hvad fanden er det for et hold? Hvad sker der, mand? Der var noget mere foder til. Det var den forkerte. Vi må lige have noget mere foder på, så den kan fokusere lidt. Den er sur, fordi den er tabt.
Luk i døren. Så, stille og roligt.
Nu er han snart en æbelblå.
Sindssygt.
Så rolig. Ikke blive bange for dem.
Nej.
Selvfølgelig ikke så meget til. Kom. Men for helvede. Kom nu. Ja.
Sådan der.
Lille sæk! Burde på helvede! Røvdyr du har, mand! Sindssygt!
This guy here is the only actor. All the rest are amateur actors or former inmates and wardens. And the interesting thing about this particular scene is that it's not scripted. What it said in the script was that there'll be a scene with this phenomenon of bird football, and it'll be about freedom. That was all that was indicated, and the documentary director was in charge of this scene, and you can see the way the camera works that something happens they didn't expect. It wasn't scripted that the bird should fly out, and of course not that the bird should bite the guy who is the main antagonist and who's also the one whose story the whole film actually is based on. You can see how the camera swirls around. You could also see two inserts of the main character that are kind of fiction inserts. They don't work perfectly here because it's not the whole film doesn't have this observational feel. But my main point here is that in order to do this kind of scene, you have to think of it throughout the whole production. I've seen so many fiction films that say, we want some authenticity, we want to do this in real places, like this was shot in a real prison that had shut down before it became an event venue. Now you can take a week as a prisoner, or actually Metallica played there last week, sort of a rough venue for them to play and so on. But I've seen a lot of fiction films that have an interest in real life, real places, locations, but somehow it seeps out, it doesn't carry all the way through to the production. Whereas in this case, they had a very clear division of labor. When you look at how fiction works, it's broken down, and only the things that seem important for the storyline get made. Whereas here they've taken really good time to say that afternoon it's only the documentary director, it'll be a scene, it'll be a few birds, and we don't know what's going to happen. And they've made like 10, 15 of those scenes, and some worked out and some didn't. But it's about production planning. And too many times sort of the fiction machine overrules those kind of scenes, or you never get to make them, basically. So this project, to me at least, it's not just that it's based on a real story, it's the whole work with real characters, with the location, understanding a whole system. We talked a lot about it as institutional analysis while they were developing the film. And then, of course, it's all about having space to work in a documentary way in the production. I think that's key, and I think another part that's key is that the people who do it have experiences, and we'll also see an example of that, both in fiction and documentary, for it to really work. Okay, the last slide, please. The last category of hybrids I've called "What is Real?" And those are films where the question of is this real or not is not just something that you think about before the film or after the film, in the marketing and so on. These are films that throughout the whole film make you question the reality of this. So it's built into the experience. I'm sure you're all familiar with The Arbor. Yeah? No? A UK film which I think is actually groundbreaking in the sense that quite a lot of these films are very experimental. The Arbor is experimental, but it doesn't feel that way when you watch it, because it's an extremely well-known story about social inheritance in UK, working class families and so on. But it does, when you look at it, you do sense that you're thinking all the time, how was this made? How is this person real? Or is it someone who's lip syncing, someone that's real? Is it a theater play? And so on and so forth. I'll just show you one example from this film here called Project Limboland. It's actually by a UK director called Jeremy Weller. Are you familiar with him? He's a theatrical director. Greenhouse Project is his theatrical base. And I just want to show you one scene that gives a sense of layers of reality within the scene. What he did was to work with 9 migrant youth in Denmark, where they, over a long period, rehearsed stories that were from their own lives, but they didn't play their own stories. So the stories came out of a workshop, but what you see on stage may not be that, or is not that particular person's story. It's something, an amalgamation of several stories that they've built up, and he actually made a point out of not having a person play a story too close to him or herself. And we are getting into a scene where this character here has been told by his older brother that he can have sex with the woman you'll see in a while, but he can never take her home to the family or get married or anything like that. His parent or his family is Muslim, and it would never work. And I hope it's self-explanatory.
Hvad så?
Hej.
Hej, gør det godt?
Stille og roligt.
Hvad så?
Ikke så meget.
Prøv at have noget at snakke med dig om.
Mm.
Vi kan ikke se hinanden mere. Vi stopper bare, mens lejen er god.
Mens hvad?
Mens lejen er god.
Hvilken vej?
Føler ikke noget for dig.
Og det er du sikker på?
Prøv at jeg siger til dig lige ud, jeg gider ikke. Jeg har aldrig følt noget for dig. Jeg prøvede, men det gik ikke så godt.
Hvis jeg har gjort noget forkert, så kan du lige så godt sige det til mig.
For at være ærlig, du er gerne en kælling.
Jeg er ikke...
Du hørte
Hvad
det godt.
siger du?
Du hørte det godt, og jeg gider ikke...
Du skal ikke kalde mig kælling.
Lad ham stå sådan der over for mig. Bare gå din
Stå, hvorfor en mor
Lad ham
over for
komme
dig?
over til mig tæt på. Lad ham komme over til mig tæt på.
Du skal slet ikke røre mig på den der måde. Du skal slet ikke røre mig på den der måde.
Lad ham lad stikke dig flot, din bitch, mand. Fjern dig fra mig. Fjern dig fra mig.
Lad ham komme overhovedet.
Lad ham komme tæt på.
Lad
ham komme tæt på mig.
Du skal slet ikke røre mig på den der måde. Du skal slet ikke røre mig på den der måde. Du skal slet ikke...
Lad ham fucking komme slet. Lad ham
Du skal slet ikke røre mig på den der...
Hør, hvad jeg siger til dig. Kan du se det spyt? Du er ikke engang det værd. Bare hold dig væk fra mig. Lad mig ringe til mig mere eller noget. Du kan ikke kende.
Hold it there. So this scene has been made because his brother told him he had to get rid of
because
you.
otherwise he'll kill his parents and the honor, and so the brother pressurized him.
And made him get rid of you.
Just tell her this, tell her that. Okay?
Do you understand?
Yeah.
It's a tough scene.
I know it's tough for you.
But what you're going to have a little quick...
It's hard to take because I get called that every day.
I know, but this isn't a scene.
It's a scene, but there's ways to talk. There's really ways to talk. I be called that every single day, Jeremy. Every day. I don't expect to come here for me to take it. I don't take it from people. I don't take it from anyone here.
I know, but no
Seriously, I get called home from my family every single day. I do not expect...
Well, I didn't know that, Thelma.
No!
Thelma, I didn't know your family called you.
There's ways to say
look at me.
things.
Look at me. Look at me. Yeah. Thelma, look at me. Listen to what I'm telling you now. Listen to me. Okay? This is not Thelma, you are playing...
Det er lige meget, Jens. Det er for meget at tage imod. Jeg kommer her. Jeg har nok med min familie derude. Jeg kommer her. Der er måder at sige ting. Jeg skal ikke høre det samme, min familie siger til mig. Det gider jeg.
Thelma, det kan jeg godt forstå. Prøv at høre. Det er ikke dig, der hører det.
Det er lige meget, Jenla. Det er lige meget. Det kommer ind. Jeg tager imod ting. Jeg ved det godt, det skal jeg ikke lade være. Men sådan er jeg. Det er sådan, jeg er. Det er sådan, jeg er. Det er det menneske, Gud har lavet mig. Fint. Det er fuck, men sådan er jeg.
So somehow the stage setting is completely taken over by a real life event in this case. And I think, for me at least, the scene shows the power that there is in switching between something, we know this is staged, it looks like a theater stage, and then in giving a sense of real reality that goes much deeper than what the staging did. But if you didn't have the staging, you wouldn't have the contrast to the very strong emotional feeling I at least get from watching this scene. I think we'll see more films that work in that way, where you, as an audience, are taken in and out of emotional ways of engaging with characters, with particular themes. Any questions so far? Any comments? This is Project Limboland is called. Any comments or questions before we go to the main part? Yeah? Okay, basically you were watching two young people who were doing a theatrical scene. The woman didn't know what was happening in that scene, but they were there as actors playing out something they had rehearsed parts of in workshops. But the fact that the man calls the woman a bitch, she took personally. She didn't see herself as being on a stage anymore, and she reacted emotionally to that. Yeah, although there's no theater audience there, it is a filmmaking, but using theatrical space, if you could call it that. Was it very unclear? Did the rest of you get what the scene did? Okay. Yeah. Sure. The first one was the mockumentary, the mockumentary where this is real, not. The second was what I called, I know that parts are made up, but they have an effect on something I see as real. A lot of examples of fictitious characters put into real-life settings, but it could be other things that we'll see later. The third one was docu-fiction, films that generally are considered fiction but have some heightened reality about them, and actually the kind of films that are winning the big awards at fiction festivals these days. If you look at, especially the non-Anglophone festivals, Cannes, Locarno, Venice, Rotterdam, that type of film is exactly what's winning all the awards at the moment. And then the last one is the more, to some extent, more experimental, or the film that discusses the reality issue in every single scene.
This may not sound like a really deep question, but I'm just curious how you'd fit this docu-soap into this, or why you haven't included it, which I'd be very interested to hear.
I think maybe because I come out of a film tradition more than a television tradition. I think you could easily put that into perhaps the docu-fiction category. Reality TV, but or maybe it would need a category of its own where there's a kind of formatting around it, and then something plays out within that. But maybe it's probably more to do with my background more in the film tradition. Any last comments, questions? Okay, let's move on to the panel. Jonas Poher Rasmussen, director of both documentary and fiction, and I should say both the works that we'll see here have not come out yet. They are in progress, not entirely finished, so it's an opportunity to see something in the making and not a finished film. The project is called Searching for Bill. Can you say a little about the method and the way of working and show us some?
Yeah. Searching for Bill is basically a bunch of little stories in the US about recession, about people losing their jobs and their homes and their cars. And we've knit all these little stories together by this mystery plot. But before I go into what we've done, we're going to show you a teaser we did just actually before we ended shooting. It was for another festival in Aarhus, in Denmark. So this is like a teaser we did before we ended shooting.
What is it with you, Bill? Why the fuck do you do this to people? Boy, you take care of your mom.
Bill seemed like the nicest guy in the world, but turned out to be the biggest asshole. Still having a hard time trying to trust people.
Where you from?
New Orleans.
New Orleans?
Yes, sir.
You here on a nice little visit, vacation?
I wish I could say that. I'm here to retrieve my car.
Oh, wow.
The person I thought was my friend, he took it for a joyride and it ended up here. Hey, sweetheart. I've got the car, and see if I can find out any more about what Bill's been doing up here. Really want to talk to that son of a bitch.
The man himself, okay. 6 foot? Maybe a little bit less. Magician hat, so with the hat over 6 feet.
He had a personality about him. He was very charismatic. And it wasn't before long that other stories started to emerge about him, and then he disappeared. And
yeah, I don't really know too much about him, like I said. It wasn't really no conversation. And it was like a little notebook in here that I seen.
A notebook?
Yeah, a little small notebook. It was on the driver's seat.
the government is corrupt. And we're on so many drugs with the radio on and the curtain is drawn. The sun has fallen down. And a dark wind blows.
I gotta put a lid on this. I've got to see this through to the end, one way or another.
As I said, this thing is just getting started. Remember, what's imploding is the entire phony American economy.
Fuck, man, come on. How long I've been dealing with this as long. We both went through this in the beginning, right? I was there when you got fired, wasn't I?
Do you know an individual by the name of Bill?
Father God, come into my life. Forgive me of my sins. And save my soul. In Jesus' name. Now I'm going to pray. People want help. And that's what we're out here for. To let them know that they have hope.
I'll take you there.
You gonna take me there?
I'll take you there.
How? How we gonna get there?
How we gonna get there? You ain't gotta worry about that. Just know I'll take you there.
I think I know Bill, but I hadn't seen him in a while.
The car's on fire, and there's no driver at the wheel. We're trapped in the belly of this horrible machine, and the machine is bleeding to death.
Bill?
Thanks. So this teaser is very Bill orientated, but every character you see in this little teaser have their own documentary stories, and this mystery plot about Bob, who's the bald guy who goes out to search for Bill. Is the mystery plot that kind of ties all these little documentary stories together. So all the characters you see in the teaser have their own little stories, which all have to do with recession in some way, or losing. And when I first approached David, my producer, and then Jacob, I wanted to do a film about recession, but not doing a film about recession, but doing it through Americans and their relationship to their cars, because I saw the car like this very American and Western symbol of freedom and prosperity, and I saw that this symbol was under threat because of financial crisis, oil crisis, climate issues, and so forth. And then we went on this, with a little help from Jacob, we went on this research trip to the US. We spent like a month in California, gathering little stories about Americans and their cars, and we pretty fast found out that this was much more than just a film about Americans and their cars. We had everybody talked about recession, talked about losing, and we got a lot of little stories back home with us. And with those stories, we started writing a full script. Ironically, almost none of the stories we found ended up being in the film, but the script was a huge help for us because we could use every story we got on our way in research and the scripts to find new stories. So when we arrived at a new location, we would know what to search for, what to look for.
And the idea of you should say that Bill is fictitious. He doesn't exist.
Yeah, Bill is fictitious. He doesn't exist.
Where did that idea come into it?
Actually, it was David and I who had one night during research, we had gathered all these little stories. And we kind of thought that we needed something to knit all these stories together. Because we had the theme that kind of connected all the stories, but we wanted something like physical present in the film that could knit it together. And then we came up with this guy who everybody was looking for. Because Bill kind of became a symbol or something of whatever, greed or the American dream or something that people missed. Not that they missed greed, but they missed the American dream when they had the good times. Yeah.
And how did you make? How does one make I mean, because you could have made a straight documentary theme film, Americans and their cars, recession, and so on. Mm-hmm. But then you insert a character like Bill. How do you make up a character like that?
To begin with, we just asked the people we met on our way to kind of try to remember somebody they once knew, a friend or a family member, somebody they didn't have contact to anymore. And then we asked them to tell us about him and just call him Bill instead. Maybe we should. That's actually clip number three. Because I have this clip from our research trip where we. From our research trip where we met these two guys in a trailer park out in the desert in California called Spanky and Dave the Rave, and we had a lot of good talks with those guys, and then we asked them to talk about Bill. And for some reason, it came very natural to them and almost everybody we met on our way to just talk about Bill. There's one other person in this clip, which is this very rich guy called Jim Goldstein, who we got to talk about Bill too. So he's going to start the clip. But yeah, let's see it.
I haven't seen Bill in about at least 15 years. He used to come over here all the time, but I loaned him some money one time and haven't heard from him since.
Well, that's what I'm saying, you know, that one night we were standing around the campfire and somebody just showed up as like a silhouette, a dark silhouette. And I said, "Who's that?" And they said, "It's Bill."
Right.
And then started talking and turned around and he was gone.
He was gone. And seemed like everybody really liked Bill. He played guitar pretty decently.
Yeah.
Played very well. He always had a good story to tell. He always had a decent attitude. But he was always looking for something.
Yeah. Yeah, so this was... This is not in the film. These guys, we couldn't find them. We tried to go back, but they were gone. But we kind of realized that for some reason the Americans had could very easily identify with this guy and Bill. So we kept on using this character. But then he changed into a more like magical and mystical character. So I'm going to show you another clip where we have a mix of a character talking about Bill, and then we have a scene which is a real scene about him who's about to lose his home. So yeah, clip number 2. Oh, sorry. Another clip number 4.
Bill had an investment for me.
It seemed legit. It wasn't. Bill knew that it wasn't. This was where Bill performed when I first met him. I was at that seat at the bar. Everybody was enjoying themselves with whoever they were with that night, having a good time. 100 people? I hadn't seen a magic act before. It was a terrific night. The man himself, dark slacks, vest, 6 foot, maybe a little bit less. I offered to buy him a drink after the show. We talked a little bit about his career, then he changed the subject. We talked a lot about me. I offered to stay for the second show. He said, no, don't bother, you've seen what I do.
Thank you for calling Home Mortgage. Para continuar en español, oprima 9. Your loan is currently delinquent or in default. As your loan servicer, we will be attempting. Please hold for the next available representative.
Got a meeting at the Always, and then I've got to be over to the gallery, and then I've got to go to Julius Caesar. I can take a nap after Julius Caesar. Thank you. Here, hold this for a second. Michael S. Martin, along with Eric Webb. What happened was we had been struggling to keep it out of foreclosure for close to 2 years now. I was supposed to call you last Monday, was the final date for payment. I didn't call you until Tuesday, and the house had been put back into active foreclosure.
That's right. It shows that the foreclosure status is active.
Los Angeles.
Okay, so that kind of made sense in a way to invent Bill, because instead of blaming globalization or the government or somebody who's very strange to describe, it's easier to blame Bill because he's a very physical presence in the film. The story about Bill is in the film is he stole Bob, the bald guy's car. Bob lives in New Orleans, and then his car is found in Detroit. So he goes to Detroit to reclaim the car, and we're going to see a scene where he finds Bill's notebook, which is this one. I can pass it around after I've talked a bit. What was I saying?
How did Bill write his notebook?
Well, we were Bill.
Okay. Okay.
So we kind of wrote the notebook on the way, because every time we needed our main character Bob to do a different turn, to do something else, we could write in a new clue in the notebook. So yeah, we wrote on the way. Yeah, but this scene is where he finds the notebook. The thing is, we really wanted to try to keep the documentary vibe in the film. And even though this scene is very fictional, we tried to work around it. So as we shot it, Bob, our main character, he didn't know that the notebook was in the car, but he has a meeting with this young kid who actually bought the car from Bill, not knowing that it was stolen. So Bob had just arranged this meeting with him just to find out a bit more information about Bill. But when they meet each other, it's actually the first time they meet. They haven't met each other before. I gave the young kid, Jalen, I gave him his Bill backstory about how he had met Bill and how he had bought the car and stuff. And I told him to tell Bob that there was a notebook in the car. But Jalen didn't really know what was going to happen going into the scene. He didn't know that Bob was going to ask him a lot of questions about Bill. So that hopefully gives it a more authentic feel than if we had made them act, because none of the characters in the film are actors. But yeah, let's try to see the clip.
You Jillian?
Yeah. How you doing?
Bob Mazer, how you doing?
How you doing, Bob? I'm doing all right.
What can you tell me about this car?
Yeah, it was a man who came in my job at Fred's Key Shop over on 2nd and Martin Luther King. He came in, you know what I'm saying, and he said he had a car for sale, and I had to, you know what I'm saying, fix the mirror there. He asked me to fix the mirror, you know what I'm saying. I mean, I really didn't take down no information. He looked like a regular guy.
Yeah.
And the cops, you know what I'm saying, I was confronted by the cops or whatever. They told me the car was stolen. I didn't know, though. I didn't know. I ain't had nothing to do with that. I just, you know what I'm saying, I like the car.
I'm not accusing you of anything. I mean, don't get me wrong.
I don't know what to tell you, but, you know what I'm saying, the car is here. You got it back.
Yeah. I was hoping I can get some more on this Bill character.
Yeah, I don't really know too much about him, like I said. I just, you know what I'm saying, it wasn't really no conversation. He just said, instead of for sale sign, I went ahead and called him up and I bought it.
All right, well, I appreciate your time.
All right. Oh, and it was I forgot, it was like a little notebook in here that I seen. Can you tell me anything about that?
I don't see any notebook.
I mean, I want me to get in here and look for it?
Yeah, actually.
Got anything? Yeah.
Yeah.
What does that say?
I need to put my glasses on.
I really got to get going. I really had something to do. I just want to stop by just to tell you about that.
Again, I appreciate it. I wouldn't have found that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any questions to the film? Are you completely confused as to who does what and who's real and who's not? Okay. It's when you watch the film, it's not as complicated as it may sound. Yeah.
He's gone. No, he's gone.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just have to comment on the fantastic soundtrack. Like this is, you close your eyes and follow it. And so I think it's brilliant. I wondered if there was a voiceover. I sensed it might have been at one point. So if you could just talk a little bit about the sound design and the music is amazing.
Yeah.
If that's yours.
We had a Danish composer do it, and he did an amazing job. And about the sound, well, we're just 4 on the road filming it all. So I put on the microports. We had microports on all the characters. Yeah.
But it's also a lot about the editing style that you see I mean, the way you use inserts and sentences linger over images that are related, but not exactly what you're hearing.
And Bill has a voice. I'll just pass this around.
So this voice has come up in the...
It does, yeah. So you just pass this around. Yeah, because the notebook is filled with like odd drawings and texts and like diary notes from Bill and a lot of personal information, all the people he conned on his way through the U.S. So that kind of knit all the little stories together because almost everybody in the film are noted in that notebook. So that made it possible for our main character to kind of call him and ask him questions about Bill, and that way it kind of, all the little stories stuck together.
Maybe one should be able to explore the notebook on the web before watching the film. I think that would be a good entry into this universe of searching for. Yes?
Yeah, it was really ingenious. And one of the things that struck me was that the non-actors who were acting out, they were sort of self-apologizing scenes in the Fictitious.
I think. I think that's a very good point. I think that you've plugged into, I mean, like with just using the idea of a missing Bill appeals to Americans. I think they can enter a space, as you're saying, of self-mythology that I mean, it would never work in Denmark. You have to build it for particular cases. It probably wouldn't work in UK either. I think it is a very American idea.
Yeah. Sorry. I'm really still interested in the research trip, but I think obviously that was critical, and a little bit about how you made that so successful.
Actually, the one thing we took back, which was the success, was Bill, because other than that, we had a lot of stories we couldn't find the people afterwards, and we didn't use it. So to begin with, I had the idea that I wanted to do a film about Americans and their cars, and we did over to do research on that. But then we realized we needed something else to kind of lift the film, and that's when we invented Bill.
But I mean, to be honest, it was a quite long and maybe for you traumatic experience because I supported the process, but I just kept on asking questions and asking them to work in new ways, redoing the script, redoing edits, redoing shoots. Maybe way beyond what's reasonable, but at least I felt that in that process you just increase the layers and the ways of looking at this. If you'd my assumption would be if you just done the film in the first or second trip, it would have been a very different feel, a very different. So for me, your maturing of the film has been extremely important. Yeah. And maybe also the fact that you do research things that you don't use can be a really crucial part of that, because in the beginning you looked for people in a different way. You look for people in a more sort of classical BBC style. We need people from different walks of life, sociological representation, so on. And you ended up with something much more emotional, much closer to your heart as to what you wanted characters to be in the film. I would say.
You did presumably find when you went back, somehow you had organized it so you did know people.
Yeah, but the thing is, we had a full script. So, for example, we have these two missionary men in the film, which in the script was one missionary man and his son traveling across the U.S. And the missionary man had lost his wife in the war in Iraq, and it ended up being two Afro-American missionary men who was former crack addicts, who had now turned to God, and they weren't planning to go across the U.S. doing missionary work, but we kind of gave them that little push so that kind of fitted the script. So they did the trip anyway. So we had these stories from our research trips. We didn't use the stories from the script, but we found something similar.
Yeah, we have to move on to next project. Joanne Reay, UK native working in Austria. You've been at the BBC for a long time, producer, writer, and you're here with an exciting project. And I think our main take on that will be, how does this fit into the market? How do you see the commercial potential of hybrids? So, yeah, please.
Having come from a documentary background, and being there in the early 90s when drama documentaries were the new, latest, greatest craze, most of the arguments were about what license do we have to take someone's true life story and change it just so that it fits into a traditional 3-act structure and gives the audience some kind of resolution at the end. And that was always a challenge. And I moved away from that to actually doing full feature films, and then it was quite a surprise to come and join Terra Mata, which is a production company which is part of Red Bull, and Red Bull is very much moving into broader feature film production. But Red Bull, being Red Bull, always wants to do something a little bit different. And the challenge that we were set, coming from Terra Mata, which is a company which has a reputation in factual program making, was not necessarily to make films about specific events or about films with a specific agenda, but really to take events which had happened in the public consciousness or are about to happen, so something that everybody is familiar with, but creating a structure that would make the audience question whether they had been too quick to receive the official version of events. So none of the films that we intend to do under this new banner of films purport to put forward a true version of events as opposed to the version that has been presented in the media, but it was simply to say you can take exactly the same footage and put the official version of events, and that footage tell you one story, or you can take the same footage and through script be able to present an alternative take, and that footage can tell you something quite the opposite. And so our challenge in a way was to take very contained sets, a little bit like 12 Angry Men. That was almost like our touchstone, because 12 Angry Men is 12 men in a room. But just through the sheer exchange and intensity of performance, they take something which is very general, which is a human's ability to judge the guilt of another when we come with so many of our own prejudices into the process. And just through performance actually cause us to think about our own background that we bring into the judgment that we make of others. So 12 Angry Men was really the touchstone so that we could take the drama, contain it within really a single set and within just a handful of actors, but use the script to force us to look at footage in a different way. So I've got the trailer of the film, which might be a good sort of starting point, and we can show a clip later if it's still necessary and if anybody's still here. So just play the trailer, thanks.
I almost had you once.
Fuck you!
How many lives would I have saved?
America will find you, and we will bring you to justice.
And we will not rest until this evil is driven from our world.
Wanted, dead or alive.
You murdered my father.
No, you're wrong. What is it you want to tell?
A story. You're fond of stories, I think.
Was one.
Have you ever seen a shadow play? The features of the characters are always concealed, and the puppeteers are never seen. Violence is the ultimate power in the world. It is a weapon of real terrorism. You were trained in counterterrorism Black Ops. Do not pretend you don't know the meaning of a false flag operation. It was in this meeting that Al-Qaeda was formed. The name suggests the base of the pyramid.
My father approved this plan.
He was one of his chief architects.
Bullshit. You don't even know who I am.
Your name is Nazareth Fell. You were listed as missing, presumed dead, in the mountains of Tora Bora in eastern Afghanistan. That's still your question, isn't it?
So essentially the premise of the film is that a Navy SEAL who had the opportunity to take out a person that we just refer to as the terrorist. He's never given a name because whether you call him Bin Laden or Khrushchev or Saddam Hussein, all of these people are just names attached to the current enemy as selected by the powers that decide on such things. So we just call him the terrorist. But the Navy SEAL had an opportunity to take out the terrorist in Afghanistan 10 years ago. He was prevented. The order was called off for reasons that were unclear to him. But because his father had been killed in the 9/11 attack, this wasn't something that he could let go of. He consequently goes rogue, spends 10 years looking for the terrorist, finds him in Vienna, captures him with the intention of executing him. And the terrorist says, I accept my fate. This was always part of the plan, but wouldn't you at least like to know the truth before you kill me? And so in a slightly sort of 1001 Arabian Nights, he tells a story to prolong the moment of his execution. And of course, in telling that story, he reveals to the soldier that nothing about the attack was as it had been presented to him. We say at the beginning of the film that this is a work of fiction, and we always present it as a what-if film. We never say that the hypothesis that we put forward is any more credible than the one that the Bush administration put forward. But our intention, and this is one of the things we were talking about, that when you try to come up with a genre name, when you're trying to sell these films, is the genre name that I came up for it is we call it an action film for the mind. And that essentially is really what our ambition is. You know, we don't have motorbikes going over exploding cars, but it is an action film for the mind. You watch it, and even if you've heard all of the conspiracy theories and you've watched Loose Change, all of which are, you know, fantastic that they're out there because everything should be debated, by putting it within a script that we control, we're able to pull many elements of alternate explanations of 9/11 and pull it into one cohesive story. And by giving, essentially there are just 3 actors in the film. The first 2 acts are just with the first 2. A third actor comes in, which is Peter Fonda at the end of the film. The film then lifts above 9/11, and it really reveals that 9/11 is just one example of how the essential nature of warfare is used again and again, generation after generation, in order to keep the economies of the world turning. So it does go way above 9/11 at the end. But we found that you can make it work as a format, and by intercutting the archive, sometimes there's just 16 frames of archive, sometimes it's almost just subliminal. There's very few moments in the film where we actually run any archive at any length. But the purpose of it was just a jolt to the brain to remind us that what we're seeing and what we're hearing is real, so that you never get lost in the dialogue and lost in the fiction, that it's constantly coming back. So when the terrorist raises the question of Tower 7, how come Tower 7 fell and it wasn't even hit by a plane, we just flash the famous footage that we've all seen on YouTube of the tower just coming down untouched by anything. And it just reminds you, just takes you back to that moment, and it makes you look at that footage in another way and think, how come I didn't ask why Tower 7? I always assumed Tower 7 was hit by something. So the archive is used as just like, almost like electroshock therapy to keep bringing us back to the fact that what we're talking about is real.
But the fact, I mean, usually if you did have conspiracy theories that you wanted to argue for the plausibility of, you would make a case, you would have an argumentation. Here you have a terrorist who is the witness of truth.
Yes.
And saying things. Do you think audiences will, how will they react to this? How will they, I mean, will they think of it as more true hearing it from the mouth of the terrorist, or what do you think?
No, I mean, we would never want anyone to watch the film and think it's true. And I absolutely shy away from attaching the word conspiracy to it as well, because in a bizarre way, I have a theory now, which many people share, that conspiracy is being used to undermine conspiracy. So there are powers out there who are forcing ridiculous stories which can easily be disproved in order to make all conspiracies deemed invalid. So this is not about conspiracy. This is about our moral responsibility to not accept the first version of events that we're told. And fortunately, you know, we have a new generation coming up who are at birth cynical, and thank God they are. I mean, my 2 daughters raised their voices at me, which they haven't done in a long time, shouting at me for my generation's fault that we let Rupert Murdoch become as powerful as we did. Why didn't we stop him? I tried to counter that they have let Mark Zuckerberg take them over with Facebook, but she didn't accept that because she said no. She said, if Facebook tried to do something that we don't want to do, we mobilize and we use Facebook against Facebook. They see themselves as a totally different generation. So we have, you know, what I always call like the Occupy Wall Street generation, which is actually looking for information and which potentially would actually accept that information can be a form of entertainment. And I don't think that I grew up in a generation where that was the case. So there was an assumption as well that we were making films like this for the kind of 50-plus audience, and of course we are, and thank God the 50-plus audience is growing in terms of cinema attendance, but we're making it for a younger generation which actually enjoys being informed and demands a level of information.
And say a little about the setup. It's an Austrian production. It's coming out.
Yes, it's Terra Mata is an Austrian company. Red Bull is an Austrian company, which not many people know. Mateschitz, who built the company, is very involved in everything that it does. And so it is quite bizarre that this film couldn't be made in America. They couldn't raise the finance for it. It's hardly surprising. So it's bizarre that it's come down to some Austrians to make it. But the fact that it's about 9/11 was not coincidental, but it was just that this was the first topic which we decided to kind of put under this scrutiny. And we're making another 2 films on completely unrelated topics. But they will...
Using the same method?
Using the same method, where it'll be intense actor performance within contained sets, where the script drives the introduction of new ideas to revisit images and stories and versions of events that we've ceased to question. So I think it's an interesting format in that way, but it is a problem when you take it to the market because buyers do demand to understand what it is that you're selling. If a buyer is buying this and looking at it for its TV rights, do they put it in a TV slot or do they put it in a movie slot? And we always know that buyers are if a dinosaur has 2 brains, the buyers are the brain and the bottom. And, they take a long time to kind of react. But we can't continue not to try and build new formats just because the buyers don't understand how to schedule. Our response to it has been to actually commit to make 3 films so that when we do come to the distributors, we can actually present a trilogy so they can maybe run 1 every Friday night and it would sort of feel like programming as opposed to an individual film. But it will, it will mature and it will come along. It'll find its place.
But it'll have theatrical release?
Yes, it's going out. It's got quite a big release in Germany and Austria and Switzerland. It's going out through Polyband and Constantine, an 80-screen release, which is a very decent cinema release for, this is a very low-budget film. Probably shouldn't say that now they've bought it, but anyway, I can tell you it's, it was made very moderately. We're talking to 2 UK distributors, both of whom would put it out theatrically. Again, these would be kind of like boutique theatrical releases, but it's still interesting that we can get it into the cinemas, and then we're doing screenings in New York and Los Angeles next week. I think one of the reasons why it might be picked up in New York and Los Angeles by chance is because there is a current battle waging between Sony and the Weinstein Company about their competing films on Bin Laden, one called Geronimo, one called Dark 030. Sony agreed to move Dark 030, which is a Catherine Bigelow film, until after the election because it was seen to be too pro-Obama. Weinstein, ever the ringmaster, brought his forward to ensure that Geronimo goes out before the election. Again, it's very, pro-Obama to the sense that he was, captain of the ship when when Bin Laden was caught. So, for a smaller boutique distributor, if they acquire our film, they can kind of enter the fray that's operating at this level by saying, well, we're going to buy this film and we're going to put this film out, and it even questions whether or not Bin Laden was the culprit. So there might be a little bit of sort of press reasons why it gets picked up. But it's an interesting... should I show just a clip from the film? Or?
Yeah, let's hear if there are any questions to the project, any comments. Can you see the film in front of your eyes? No, let's go to the clip.
Okay.
Harodim. Yeah, maybe you should explain the title.
Well, with all good marketing strategies, you try and come up with a title that people have to Google, because as soon as they Google it, then you've made a connection with your audience. But Harodim is actually a very ancient Masonic term, and it refers to the foot soldiers of King Solomon. So they are the sworn devotees that will do whatever King Solomon commands them to do. And when the film in the third act rises above 9/11 and actually looks at the international forces that are governing global events, then obviously there's a heavy thrust of Masonic history that comes into that. And so the word was chosen to partly reflect the Masonic themes that come in later in the film, but also just to give a word that was international and might cause people to look it up just so that they find a connection with the film.
Yeah.
Thanks.
It's a tedious question really about archive. Presumably, even though you said 16 frames, it's still quite expensive.
Oh, absolutely. The biggest single expense that we had in the entire film was our archive. And we bought the rights for everything. You have to now buy for iPads and everything. So the archive was more expensive than Peter Fonda. And he ain't cheap.
I should say, I mean, when you say it's a low-budget film, that's because you're comparing it to international fiction films.
Absolutely, yeah. It's high budget for a documentary,
high budget
but
for a documentary.
low budget for a theatrical release feature film, yes.
Yeah. Or it's actually about the average of a Danish feature film. So, yeah. Let's see a clip.
So is my patient.
Do you mind if I walked a bit? I'm a creature of habit. I tend to think better on my feet.
I hope you're thinking of trying to do something stupid. It would simplify things.
No, it wouldn't.
Go ahead.
They told me stories too. My father, my uncle. Horror stories about the Soviets, Afghanistan. Tales of inhuman barbarities perpetuated against helpless Muslims. Women. Children, babies, entire families. You were still a child then. In many ways, so was I. We all were. Those of us who still believed a better world. A necessity of fighting for one. Life was simpler in those days. There was a cold war to fight, an evil empire to defeat. Your government had an enemy to sell to its people. Business was very good for the defense contractors. The CIA was still fighting the good fight. God was on our side. The world media hadn't turned us into suicide bombers and bearded religious fanatics. Quite the opposite, in fact. We were freedom fighters, noble and oppressed, fighting your enemy and dying for your holy tentative causes. World democracy, human rights, the rule of law.
I am dedicating on behalf of the American people the March 22nd launch of the Columbia to the people of Afghanistan.
We never had it so good. Funny thing, it didn't feel like that to us.
We helped you. Supplied you with weapons, training, whatever you needed to fight back. We saved your asses.
Yes, you did. And more. So much more.
I think that's it. So you can see there how it just intercuts between, and once you actually get into the movie, you almost just forget that you're moving between the dialogue and the archive. It sort of becomes quite hypnotic at a point where it moves between it. But it just becomes a different way of handling scripted drama.
But it'll be interesting to see how audiences, I mean, also in the marketing, to what extent you have to write certain things, or because people, how it's gonna, are you going to use the word hybrid? Are you going to use?
No, I mean, we just call it an action film for the mind. We're not sort of trying to fall by either using documentary or drama in the title, and you can only show by doing. So we hope by doing more films like this, eventually, it won't be necessary to categorize it. It'll just be another form of movie.
Yeah. Any last questions, comments before we close off? I hope you feel you had an overview of what's happening to some extent in Danish film, but in the hybrid space. Yes?
Yeah.
And also, the final question is, given that 9/11 is now more than 10 years ago, is there a worry that perhaps people are not necessarily thinking about voting?
Absolutely, and that's one of the reasons why we never actually put the film forward necessarily as being about 9/11. And as the film unfolds, you realise that, as I say, 9/11 is just a trigger point to actually enter into this debate, to look at how we are constantly presented with just a new enemy. And it just so happens that bin Laden was the new current flavour, but putting him in a historical context that shows how often that flavour changes. So it's not really about 9/11, and you do realise that quite quickly in the film, that it moves on to being about who is actually controlling world politics and controlling our understanding of what's going on. And again, the purpose of it will, once we've sort of completed the trilogy of films as well, you know, our ambition is that people will understand that the purpose of them is just so that when you leave the cinema or when you leave watching it on TV, it will work that muscle in your brain that constantly means that whenever you see anything else presented to you, like whatever is happening in Greece at the moment, we're being put in a state of panic about the collapse of the euro if Greece pulls out. You know, I now constantly think, well, how useful is it that we are being forced to be made fearful? So, you know, the purpose should really be that it just exercises that muscle. I don't like to call it the muscle of cynicism, but it exercises a muscle within our brain, saying if we constantly see how easy it is for events to be reinterpreted, that even when we're seeing something that's unfolding now, we would already be questioning exactly, you know, someone somewhere sat in Goldman Sachs has already worked out how they're going to make a fortune from the collapse of Greece, you know, and that's the way that we have to approach things.
So that's the common theme of the trilogy, yes. The fear.
Well, real fear films. We've got this very cute ambigram that we've got the word real, and when you turn it upside down, it reads fear, and you bring it back up because it's constantly saying what is actually to be frightened of. As long as they continue to distract us with what they want us to be frightened of, we no longer pay attention to actually what we should be fearful of, which is the erosion of civil liberties and all of those other issues. So they're just saying, look, kittens over there, meanwhile getting on with business. So we hope that with films like this, we will find a way that we can constantly make people not always twist their neck in the direction that we're being pointed.
Was there another or two more questions?
We will be promoting it virally. We have a very nice viral campaign, but we are also building up the Real Fear blog site and the Real Fear community, and we do hope that we build a community around these films, which is active, and in which the films just play one, you know, media role. So we will be building the Real Fear community at the same time as the films.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, and to some extent, that's the discussion I wanted to avoid. But at least, depending on what your viewpoint is here, as long as it's not a kind of a moral standoffish, you're right. I mean, and my point would be historically that it didn't start out with one such thing called documentary, another thing called fiction. It started out with film, and then from that, two different ways of approaching film came out, and it's always been in the meeting points between those two that new types of filmmaking have emerged. And actually, if you look at the founding documentaries, they would be considered hybrid now. So it's only because we have a 60s, 70s Anglo-Saxon objective direct cinema heritage that we're still grappling with that it is an issue. Otherwise, it wouldn't be an issue. But for me, the important thing here is to talk about methods, to talk about, and I think all these projects here do take a lot of different methods from what's the methods usually employed in either documentary or fiction, and I think that's the interesting part.
What I get a bit worried about, to be honest, is when fiction makers borrow this kind of artifice and objectivity from them.
Yeah, but in some part it depends. I would agree with you if there was a deliberate attempt to deceive in order to present an agenda where the agenda is believe this, then I think, yes, I wouldn't want to watch a film about a court case or a trial, you know, and then to sort of be engaged in it and then find out, you know, the whole thing was, you know, fictitious. But, you know, I always think that there are so many different ways that you can tell a story, and sometimes the most important thing is if you have a subject matter which is going to be difficult to engage an audience in a straight, traditional documentary style, if you take it into a different route because you know by that means you will actually be able to speak to a different audience, the end game is not to say, I've found this audience and now I'm going to tell them what to think. The end game is to say, well, if they've at least had the essence of the story communicated to them and it had caused them to question, then that's good enough. That is the only ambition that we have. So there is an argument that we could have made a far more powerful documentary, and indeed far more powerful documentaries have been made about 9/11, which have just taken a straight documentary route. But I kind of know that, you know, my daughters wouldn't go and see it. But my daughters probably would go and see this, even though, you know, because Travis Fimmel at some point gets his shirt off. I don't really care what it takes to get them to see it. And believe me. You know, so I don't care what it takes for my daughters to go and see it. I just want them to go and see it because what they'll come out is just asking the same questions. So I think as long as that there is no dangerous intent to deceive, I think if the intent is to entertain, then you should be free. But if the intent is to deceive to sell an agenda, then I agree with you that it's questionable.
Jonas, David, do you have a closing remark? I think we're about to wrap up.
About this discussion?
Or anything, being in Sheffield, or when we can see Searching for Bill? No.
You'll be able to see it sometime next winter, I guess. Yeah,
in a major festival near you?
Yeah, in all the big festivals and in every cinema in England. And I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. Thank you so much all for coming. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you, panelists, for coming so early after a football match.
A rare victory, yes.